Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Montgomery Focus. We're coming to you this time from the Montgomery Museum of Fine Arts. Back in August of 2013, the nation celebrated the 50th anniversary of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s famous I Have a Dream speech. Here at the museum, they commemorated the speech with a special exhibit, and we're going to meet the curator who put all of the special pieces together. Come on. Okay, here we are with Jennifer Jankowskis, and you put all of this together.
Yes, I did.
You were the curator. That's the official museum word.
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
And what we did to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the speech,
Dr. King's
speech, exactly, was to put together two exhibitions. Right now, we're in the exhibition Piecing Together History, the Civil Rights Quilts by Yvonne Wells.
Now, is she from Gee's Bend, or she's not from Gee's Bend?
No, she's
okay.
not. She's from Tuscaloosa.
Okay.
She grew up in Tuscaloosa and still lives there today. She's been quilting since the 70s. She's a retired teacher. She was a physical education teacher and taught for over 25 years. What's really interesting is she was one of the first teachers to
She was what kind of a teacher?
Physical education.
So like
she was a coach.
So she wasn't an arts instructor. She was getting kids to do jumping jacks and push-ups and stuff.
Exactly.
Cool.
But after 5 years of teaching in 1970, she was asked to go into one of the first integrated schools, and she is African American, and so she taught there for over 20 years. But she took up quilting in the late 70s when her husband built on an addition to their house,
right.
And she needed something to keep her legs warm.
Sure.
And
also, it was not quilt as a work of art, but quilt as necessity warmth.
Exactly.
Cool.
But pretty early on, she came up with her own style, and it became more of an art form for her. And she wasn't trained as a quilter, she wasn't trained as an artist,
sure.
But she certainly is both. And she really is somebody who's so great at bringing her ideas and telling a story. And her quilts are about religion, which is very important to her, also political issues, which are very important to her. And certainly being in Alabama and being in Tuscaloosa, during the Civil Rights era, it really had an impact on her, and she's created a large body of work that deals with the Civil Rights era.
Certainly, for her to be the age that she is, she encountered racism and suppression face-to-face, or oppression face-to-face. So
yes.
You think it manifests itself in her work?
Absolutely. And, Yvonne is somebody who's very soft-spoken and lets her art speak for her often, but she definitely has a point of view and, was definitely involved in different aspects of the Civil Rights era, and it's reflected in these quilts here that are at the museum.
Sure. Well, if you will, give us a tour of this particular piece, and we'll let the camera come in close to see what you're talking about.
Well, this piece is actually really interesting. It's called Civil Rights in the South 3. She often would do 3 quilts of a subject that was very important to her. So this is the third in the series. And this particular work has a lot of different elements. She starts off in the bottom right corner with a black man who's rowing a man ashore off of the Mayflower. So she's talking about a very early point in America's history and the relationships between blacks and whites that started very early on. And they come ashore and they see people picking cotton. Then you go further around the quilt and you see a lynching that takes place. So she doesn't shy away from very difficult subjects. Moving more into the Civil Rights era, she has a bus here to symbolize the bus boycott that happened here in Montgomery. There is the 3 gentlemen that were working towards registering voters, I believe in Mississippi, who were killed. Exactly, and she's actually listed their names there. Up here, you see 3 graves, and she says the 4th grave is behind the church, but that is to reference the 4 little girls that were killed in the 16th Street Baptist bombing
of course.
In Birmingham. You've got George Wallace, who's blocking the schoolhouse doors for the University of Alabama. And you've got
And fitting that this is part of the exhibit, since we're looking at the 50th anniversary of events from 1963, and the schoolhouse door and the 16th Street Church happened in 1963. Sure.
Exactly. You know, other elements include the Capitol here in Montgomery, and at that time, the Confederate flag was flying above the American flag, and of course that has since changed, I believe in 1993, but she depicted it as it was back during that era. And here you've got marchers all around, and it's just filled with all sorts of information, and these are symbols that she uses in a lot of her quilts too. So as we look at other quilts in the exhibition, you'll see some of the same imagery.
Sure. Now, have young children been here to see the quilts, and do they realize that this is a chronicle of history, or do they just see silhouettes and pieces of fabric?
You know, I think probably at first glance that's what they see, but you know, the more they spend time with it, I think they are realizing that it is elements of history, and that's a really important aspect of this work for Yvonne. She really sees her work as recording history, and as an educator, she wants it to be a tool so that it can be looked back upon and these events aren't forgotten, and people can really understand what happened and what she experienced as well.
Good deal. Well, let's see some else, some of the other quilts that that you've got here on display or as part of the exhibit. This is the flag of Alabama. I recognize that much.
Yes. And this piece is titled Stars Fell on Alabama, which of course is a very famous book.
And I think our state song as well. Maybe.
Exactly. And it, as you say, it is created on an Alabama flag. What's interesting is that a lot of the materials that Yvonne gets are from people that she knows. Sometimes strangers will leave her materials on her doorstep. But when she uses a flag, and she uses flags often in her work, they're always flags that have been used already. She never takes, you know, a brand new flag and uses it. It's important that that piece of material has that history embedded in it, that it's flown, it's been used before she incorporates it into any of her work. But here you can see she's got the angel at the very top that's on sort of like a swing set.
Sure.
And the A frame of the swing set stands for Alabama.
Of course.
And the angel is scattering the stars over the state. And you see on both sides she's got figures marching on either side of the quilt, and that's to represent the marchers that both marched from Selma to Montgomery, but also in Washington.
I was about to say that looks like the Edmund Pettus Bridge. It's got the archwork for sure. And
here you see that she's shown that it's both blacks and whites marching together. She's integrated into the quilts people from both races.
And the doves of peace, up in the corner.
And I think that's something that's also really wonderful about Yvonne's work, is that she's dealing with some very dark and difficult times, but she's also addressing the triumphs and the joy that people felt, even with small successes. And then, of course, the larger successes that have come from that struggle.
Good deal. Okay. More flags, this time the American flag.
Exactly.
And is there a name for this particular piece?
This is King's Mountain.
Okay.
And here she has got Martin Luther King standing on the mountain, and she's talking about him, giving him one of many of his speeches.
Sure.
Because, you know, of course, he was a very influential orator and somebody who really was able to, you know, get people galvanized.
Motivated and galvanized, indeed.
Exactly. So here, in this particular quilt, he's up on top of the mountain, and these are all his supporters down below.
Sure.
But if you go down to the lower level, you're going to see some of the same symbols that you see on that earlier quilt. You see the Klans people, you see the graves for the 4 girls who lost their lives at the bombing at the 16th Street Baptist Church.
And obviously a reference to his speech in 1968 about he's been to the mountaintop and seen the other side.
Exactly. So, you know, she's talking about, you know, the difficulties and the struggles, but she's made him really large, has a son, you know, right next to him, which speaks of the hope that he brought, and, you know, all of his supporters here as well.
And the cross, I guess, to display the connection to his being pastor in the Baptist church.
Right.
This is a beautiful, beautiful quilt. Now, these are part of a permanent collection that stay together, or are they owned by the Museum of Fine Arts?
Well,
or?
the museum owns a number of these quilts that are on display, but Yvonne also graciously lent us some of the works to, really explore her civil rights quilts in more depth. So we have a great number here that we put on display on and off, and others that were just brought in for this exhibition.
Does she ever sell them, or?
She does.
What might one have to pay in order to walk away
Well,
with
that's
it?
something that we don't really, we didn't.
I have my checkbook ready.
You'll have to discuss that directly with her.
I got you. Well, let's see some of the other quilts that she has here. I see another Alabama flag in this one.
Yes, exactly. And here, not only does Yvonne use the flag, but she has a piece of fabric that is printed with the Pledge of Allegiance on it. And of course, the symbol wearing this fabric is Rosa Parks. And behind Rosa Parks is a big wheel, which symbolizes, of course, the wheels of the bus. And these little bits of thread that she has coming around shows not only that it's moving, but it's like sort of mud splattering off of it.
Sure.
And of course you have the full bus back behind her there in the top left corner. And then again, bringing in a lot of the symbols that she's brought into all of her quilts. You'll see the water fountains, one labeled white, one labeled color. You also see a symbol for the Klansmen. And then you have a bunch of marchers and people that are part of the bus boycott, and marchers that symbolize the other marches that took place.
Now it's my turn to be a little bit of a curator and
Sure.
historian. A lot of people think that the original bus that she was on is in Detroit or in Michigan, but that ain't the bus. I want to scream at the top of my lungs that they bought the bus because the old owner signed an affidavit that said this was the bus, but the city of Montgomery had the ability to, or the option of buying the bus, but we just couldn't trust that it was indeed the authentic vehicle. So we passed, and a bus is in Michigan, but we have no idea, and no one knows where the original bus is.
Wow.
A beautiful piece of work, though. And that concludes Michael Burdell's automotive history of historic buses. What's in this quilt here?
This quilt is another portrait of Martin Luther King. It is actually called Portrait of the King. Here she has him front and center, over, larger than life. And as he was very charismatic, and I think in some ways a larger than life figure who, again, as we mentioned before, really galvanized people and motivated them. Unlike King's Mountain, where it's a quilt that really celebrated his successes, this really looks at all the turbulent times that were happening at the same time. But what she has done is, out of his pipe, she's depicted these hearts, and that's to symbolize that he had a message of hope and strength and coming from love. And despite all of this turbulence that's going on around him, he is a strong figure in the face of all of that. And as she has in many of these other quilts, if you look closely, you'll see a lot of the same symbols that represent these really difficult periods. But again, he's holding his Bible, symbolizing his status as a reverend. But also for Yvonne, her spirituality is really important. And she references that in a lot of her works as well.
And we see the Klan represented in the bus as well.
And
in the,
the
quilt.
dogs that were unleashed upon marchers, and again, the water fountains here in the corner, and the graves, George Wallace from the Schoolhouse Store. So all of these elements are found in a great number of these quilts.
And I guess I'm going to save my next question to her next piece of art, but in this particular case, do you have any idea how long it took her to to create this from start to finish?
You know, I don't know exactly how long for this piece, but typically her pieces could take her up to 3 months for one panel. It depends on the complexity of the piece. She's often working on multiple quilts simultaneously, so in some ways it's hard to gauge how long one particular quilt takes. But, you know, especially since her retirement, you know, she will quilt all day long. It's a real passion for her.
And you said she didn't take any formal training to
No, she's a self-taught quilter, self-taught artist. And, you know, she likes to say how, you know, some quilters will come up to her and cringe a little bit with the way that she may have finished an edge, but, you know, she's really authentic to her vision and her voice as an artist. And so, you know, there's really no wrong or right way to do it.
Everyone's a critic. That's what I've learned, Jennifer. Good deal. All right, well, let's look at this masterpiece over here. And this one did take a little bit longer than three months to create.
That's right. This is an 11-panel piece. This is the first time it's ever been seen in its entirety. It's debuting here at the Montgomery Museum of Fine Arts. And what it is a quilt that is inspired by Maya Lin's monument that is at the Southern Poverty Law Center here in Montgomery.
The one with the waterfall.
Exactly. So I believe that monument's called 40 Lives for Freedom. And Yvonne came and visited and saw that and just really struck a chord with her. And she decided that that information was so important. And she had, you know, thought, what is a way that she could bring that information to some of her students, really? And knowing that she couldn't get them all down here to Montgomery, she decided to make a quilt. And this quilt took her over 18 years to complete. 18
years, wow.
She would work on it and then put it away and then bring it back out again. And this year, being the 50th anniversary, she decided, I've got to finish it. It has to happen this year if it's ever going to happen. So she finished this, I think, in February of this year. And what she has done is she has taken the actual text that is off that monument and created it into this chronological, you know, year-by-year section. So in this first panel, you have starting in 1954 going to 1956, all of the people that lost their lives during the civil rights struggle. And what's different from Maya Lin's monument is that Yvonne has, of course, used different colors, and she's added other visual elements to the quilt to you know, give a little bit more information. 1958, I'm sure that there are things that happened, but there was nothing listed on the monument, so she's created a blank pan.
Sure.
But this was really a labor of love for her.
As we looked close, I saw that it looked like some of the S's were backwards. Is there a story behind that?
Not really. You know, she had mentioned to me that she didn't even realize that she was doing it until somebody else had called it to her attention. And there are places where the S's are the right direction too, but most of them seem to be backwards, but it's not anything that she's done with a real clear purpose.
Good deal. Wow. Okay, even more quilts are here. And what is this area of the museum called? Is it a special gallery name that's...
Well, we are standing in the two galleries where the quilt show is the Goldman Gallery, and the Richards Gallery.
Okay, good deal. I just wanted to give Mr. Goldman or the Goldman family and the Richards family a little bit of plug for their generosity to the museum.
In the first section of the exhibition that we just talked about are a lot of the quilts that deal very directly with what was happening in the 50s and 60s through the civil rights era. And certainly the quilts in this gallery are related, but I think we're looking at some of the things, not all the quilts, there are certainly quilts that deal with tough times, but the quilts in this section really reflect some of the successes of what the civil rights era and how things have changed and how things have, you know, moved on in history and what all of those important events did to make things move forward for us.
It looks like the fabric pieces are brighter, more jubilant and such.
I think in some ways that's absolutely true. And you saw a lot of red in the other room, and that's because for her, red symbolized the bloodshed that happened then. And here, for example, we've got something completely different. And this is a quilt called The Great American Pastime, homage to Jackie Robinson. And, you know, certainly he broke the color barrier in the baseball league before a lot of the civil rights events were taking place, but he was certainly somebody who, you know, had a great impact. And after his first successful year, I believe 17 more black players entered into the leagues. So what she's done here is created this fantasy game between the Dodgers, who he played for, and the All-Stars. And you can see the All-Stars because she's actually quilted a little star on each of them. And of course, this is on the field, and so you have a green quilt, and she's got the American flag on the side. At the top left here, you'll see piano keys. And this is referencing the music that's played, that Take Me Out to the Ball Game during the 7th inning stretch. And this is supposed to be happening at the 7th inning stretch. And of course, larger than life is Jackie Robinson up in the top right there. And now they only used wooden bats back then, but
and
she's
still today in Major League Ball,
you know, made this into an aluminum bat, and we've given it a little bit of glitter there.
And he's got his number 42 there as well.
And then you have, of course, you know, a lot of advertisements that people sponsor often along the, you know, backboards of the field, and she's included that here. So this is a fun piece, but again, it still relates to civil rights when she is honoring somebody who really made a difference.
Good deal. Let's see what we have next door to it.
Well, this one, it goes back to some of those darker commentaries, but it's talking about not just two of the really important people during the civil rights era, Martin Luther King and John F. Kennedy, but also Abraham Lincoln. And he, of course, was instrumental in helping come up with the amendment that abolished slavery. And what these three men have in common, of course, were that they were all assassinated. This piece is called The Assassin's Bullet. And she's depicted each of them in a morgue. This is a morgue up here. Flags are flying at half staff, and then she has their graves with their birth and death dates marked at the bottom. Also, there's like sort of toe tags, as you would find on a body, and that on the toe tags is the name of the hero, the president, and also Martin Luther King Jr., but then she's also created tags that has their assassin's name.
Okay. Yeah, that's very very dark, but it's powerful. I can't deny it. And the flags, of course, are at half staff.
Right.
And what do we have here in this piece?
Well, this is also very dark, both visually, and you know, it plays with both darkness and hope too. Certainly, you can see it's pretty much all black, and if you look closely, you'll see on it black figures, and you've got some shackles here. You also have a man with tape across his mouth, and this piece is called Do You See What I See? But she also has talked about this in terms of do you hear what I hear? And you know, how people look or hear about events, how they react to events, and what impact it might have on one person is not how another person interprets it. And she also has, of course, the scales of justice here. On top of that sits a dove, which signifies hope. Here in the middle, she's got the cross with the heart, again signifying Christ. And on top, she has the sun. It has glitter. It's black, but it's glitter, and that's to really signify that there is hope and there, you know, there is some rays of sunshine. She's got 3 birds coming across here. You'll see a series of watches that signify the passage of time, and also signifying that passage of time is she has depicted George Washington, which is our first president, of course, and then you have Barack Obama, who is our current president.
Indeed. Wonderful. Yeah, we've got some pieces that are much, much brighter, and it looks like a figure in a wheelchair, so explain that to us, please.
Well, the figure in the wheelchair is actually George Wallace. And, you know, later in his life, I think Wallace really came to regret some of his actions.
He did.
And this is actually based on a true event where Wallace decided to ask for forgiveness for his, you know, actions and deeds. And he went to the Martin Luther King Jr.'s family and wanted to set up a meeting. And indeed, believe that this is Martin Luther King Jr.'s son. And this is the meeting that they had where he's asking for forgiveness. And although Yvonne used a lot of words in that quilt, 40 Lives for Freedom, she often doesn't actually use a lot of text, and instead she'll use these long dashes that represent words. And here she's got these 5 dashes that says, "Will you forgive me?" is what that stands for. And then coming from his mouth, Martin Luther King Jr.'s son's mouth, says, "I will," these 2 dashes. So I think, you know, it's really a wonderful piece to kind of show how, you know, there has really been change, and that personal change is just as important as you know, societal change, because it really takes individuals to make a difference.
And this piece right next door, it looks like it's the brightest,
well, this
definitely
is
the most hopeful of them all.
Well, one of 2 really hopeful pieces. This is Dove Descending, and she was really inspired by one of the stained glass pieces in her church, which is of a dove. And she decided she really wanted to try and make that into a quilt form. And of course, you know, the dove signifies the Holy Spirit, and, you know, is something that talks about peace and love. And for her, this was a way to really capture and also give, I think, some
hope and optimism,
to people, you know, who were suffering that time.
Good deal. Excellent. And then more brightness, so it's really an illustration of how she perceives our country's moved forward.
Not only
in race relations.
Yes, definitely, but she's also, you know, I think celebrating the small moments of success.
Sure.
Because although that was a very difficult time, there were successes, and people celebrate. And this is called Shout Hallelujah, because she's depicting, you know, the dances and celebrations of people celebrating small successes.
Good deal. Well, as beautiful as these quilts are, this is just half of the exhibit, and the other half, let's go see what that's all about.
All right.
Okay, Jennifer, we're here in the Rushton Gallery, and these aren't quilts, these are photographs.
Yes,
that I
they are, right.
Taken by a very famous portrait photographer.
Yes, Yosef Karsh, who is a Armenian artist who is also took on Canadian citizenship. He had left Armenia during the genocide that was happening there, and that really affected him greatly. We are very lucky here at the museum to have a large number of his photographs. He is one of the best known portraitists, and he photographed all of the presidents since Eisenhower, I believe. A lot of musicians and artists, and
anybody who
is anybody. Exactly.
Indeed.
And so we're really excited to have such a great group. And when we were putting these exhibitions together, we thought this would be the perfect opportunity to not only look at some of the key players in the civil rights era, but people who really made a difference. And this exhibition is called Karsh's Faces of History, Making a Difference.
Now, as the curator, how hard was it for you to decide, yes, someone makes the cut, or yeah, you did good, did great, but you're not going to be included?
You know, he really selected wonderful people to, you know, work with, and we looked at what we had in our collection and thought that we had some great people to highlight here. So we just pulled those out, and we're excited that people get to take a look and get to know these people a little bit better. And what Karsh was so wonderful about doing is not only, of course, capturing their physical attributes, and many of these people, certainly if they were celebrities, are often very beautiful, but he was able to really capture something from within. He focused on lighting and really getting to the essence of who they are. Whenever possible, he would try to photograph them in their home so they would be more comfortable,
Sure.
even though you won't see a background necessarily. Right. But it made them feel a little bit more secure and maybe open and more revealing of their personality when he was able to click that shutter.
And a lot of his pictures ended up being on the cover of Life magazine, which
That's
was
right.
a giant in the magazine industry many years ago. So
Yes.
now I recognize this lady, and why does she warrant inclusion in this great exhibit?
Marian Anderson is probably known most for her wonderful voice. Yes. She is actually the first black woman who sang at the Metropolitan Opera, and that happened in 1955. She also, at the pinnacle of her career, had a fantastic concert at the Lincoln Memorial, and that really came about because she was denied her first concert choice arena, which was a space that was owned by the Daughters of the Revolution. Right. So she really battled discrimination quite a bit, but she was very much somebody who worked around segregation and was able to be a voice for so many people.
And she's right next door to Audrey Hepburn.
That's right.
And how does Miss Hepburn warrant inclusion in this collection? I mean, I know her from
all sorts of movies.
Funny
Funny
Breakfast at Tiffany's,
exactly.
and My Fair Lady.
And I think that that's probably how most people see Audrey Hepburn as an actress. But she is somebody who, as a child, witnessed the Holocaust and herself starved quite a bit before she came over as a teenager, I believe, to the U.S. And because of that experience, it just, was very close to her heart, and she became a great humanitarian and devoted much of her later years to UNICEF and working with starving children in Africa. So it is for her humanitarian efforts that we're recognizing her in this exhibition.
Excellent.
And I think for her, that was much more important than what she did ever as an actress.
Indeed. Paul Robeson is next door, and just a fantastic voice. I feel like I should turn up my bass just as we're here in front of his portrait.
And again, he was also an actor, and that's how a lot of people know him, but he was also very much a social activist. He went to law school, and he really, despite going through a lot of discrimination himself, really, fought against that, and it was a beacon for a lot of people.
A Renaissance man. I mean, you mentioned law school, his entertainment career, and I believe he was also quite the athlete
That's
in
right.
his heyday. Joan Baez. And she, tell us why she specifically should be a part of an exhibit that commemorates the 50th anniversary of Dr. King's speech.
Well, she, is known as a folk singer, and but she also was very political and did a lot of protest singing. But specifically, it was interesting to bring her into this exhibition because of the tie to the civil rights and the tie to Martin Luther King's speech at the March on Washington. And she actually opened up his speech by singing "We Will Overcome."
Wow.
So she was kind of getting
not
everybody.
Surprised that she was there, just because, like you said, she does have an activist gene in her, and that's probably why she's right next to this next portrait.
That's right. Certainly, Muhammad Ali, has fought many battles, both in the ring and out. He was somebody who also stood up for his ideals and decided that he was not going to fight in the war once he was drafted. He was a conscientious objector. And, it was held against him for a very long time. I don't think he was pardoned from that until
it went to the U.S. Supreme Court.
That's right.
That allowed him to get his boxing license back. And as great of a boxer as he was, I think he's revered now more for taking that unpopular at the time stand. And I love this photograph, the way Karsh has him just posed. I mean, it just says, I don't have a modest bone in my body, and I am the greatest. And just a look of smugness.
Yeah,
sure.
and the wonderful thing about these photographs is just the clarity of detail and the richness that Karsh is able to bring through that allows their character and their personality to shine through.
Sure. All of these portraits seem to be in black and white. Did he prefer this over color, do you know?
He really liked to shoot in black and white. He would often also shoot in color, sometimes, at the same sitting, but the bulk of his portraits are in black and white. And I think that for him, it's that richness that you get through with the really deep blacks and then the bright highlights that you get from a lot of the natural light that he preferred.
Good deal. And this really is an all-star collection. I guess Montgomery should be very, very proud to be the
We are. We're thrilled to have all of these works, and we have many more works by Karsh as well, too. And so we're thrilled to have that as part of our collection. And
I would be remiss if I didn't give a pat on the back to the museum director, Mark Johnson, who cultivated their relationship with the Karshes, and as a result was entrusted with these beautiful works of art.
Yes, he's, as you said, built up a relationship over many, many years, and it's really been something that's benefited the museum greatly.
Sure.
And right now we're looking at a portrait of Nelson Mandela, who unfortunately has been in the news for very sad reason. We hope he gains his health if things go well. But Mandela is somebody who is very instrumental in South Africa with apartheid and bringing an end to apartheid. He was involved in much like Martin Luther King, nonviolent ways of bringing the end to apartheid. But he was arrested and imprisoned for, I believe, 27 years.
27 years.
And after his release, he became the first African-American, well, not African-American, sorry.
Not American, sure.
Right. The first black African to hold the presidency in South Africa. So even after he ended his presidency, he continued to really work towards different social causes.
And what I think is so unique is a lot of young people never knew that he was imprisoned.
Yeah.
But for many, many years, we had no image of what he actually looked like. We saw the images of 1962, and then some artists would just do an age progression.
Right.
And then finally, when he was liberated, we were able to see him again.
It's amazing. The space that he was imprisoned in is maybe 8 by 10 feet. And for 27 years, it's very small space, but he, continued to work throughout his imprisonment, with people that would come and visit or through letters, and really, again, being somebody like Martin Luther King who could motivate others to continue with the cause.
And they took a note of inspiration from the American Civil Rights Movement. So there is a connection between Dr. King and President Mandela, and indeed the struggle for freedom around the globe. And we as Montgomeryans should stick our chests out with pride for what we were able to do. And I guess we were inspired by Mahatma Gandhi in India. So it's all one love.
Right. Well, and another South African is Bishop Desmond Tutu, who worked again to end apartheid in South Africa. And he also chaired the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in 1996. And he continues to be an advocate for human rights. But he was very instrumental in a lot of the same fights that Nelson Mandela was working towards in ending apartheid in South Africa.
And I think a Nobel Prize recipient as well.
There's a number of Nobel Peace Prize winners in this room, as well as Presidential Medal of Honor honorees.
And presidents.
And presidents, that's right. The first president we will talk about is John F. Kennedy, of course. And he was he was the youngest president and the first Roman Catholic president, but he's included in this exhibition because of his ties to the civil rights era. He certainly was instrumental specifically when George Wallace was barring the door at the University of Alabama, and he called and said, federalize the National Guard so that they could remove him and let the students register. His speech in June 11th, 1963, really laid the groundwork for the Civil Rights Act that happened in 1964, really bringing together people and letting people everywhere understand the difficulties that Black Americans were going through and what segregation was, how it was affecting people, and really bringing it to the attention of everyone. So,
and kind of appropriate that portrait-wise, he's adjacent to the King, Dr.
And you'll
King.
notice they are sort of looking at each other here.
And did you, as a curator, do you not only select who's included portrait-wise, but also the sequence?
Absolutely, absolutely. So, you'll notice on this wall, we're really looking at world leaders. And then we talked a lot about, on the other wall, some of the celebrities. And then the last wall we'll look at are people who, are more scholars, and they're not quite celebrities and they're not quite world leaders, but they've really made a difference. So there is, some thought behind how it's all laid out.
Do you know where this picture was taken? Was it by chance taken in Montgomery, or was it in Atlanta?
I'm not sure.
Does it
to tell
say
you
which
the truth.
year it was taken?
It was taken in 1962.
62.
Mm-hmm. So the year before the speech.
He might have been here in. Oh no! I'm sorry. I think he left. I don't know. I'm not a historian. I'm just a city administrator. I reckon.
Right. He may have left already.
Yeah,
I think he might have. But of course, he was instrumental in so many ways. And again, one of the keys is that I think he was able to bring everybody together and really work through a spirit of nonviolence, which is what he really promoted to create change. And he was certainly instrumental in the bus boycott in it was 55 to 57, I believe. And
he was a very young man at that time.
That's
People
right.
just don't know that. I mean, they see this larger than life image, but in his youth, he had the leadership of the Montgomery Improvement Association thrust upon him, and through his intellect and courage and oratorical skills was able to raise the conscience of the nation.
Yeah, and he also was instrumental in founding the Southern Christian Leadership Conference too. So many ways, on so many levels, he was really the key figure in the civil rights.
Indeed.
This is Pope John Paul II, and he's been in the news a lot lately as well because recently he has been granted his second miracle, and so probably by the end of this year he will be declared a saint. But during his tenure, he was the first non-Italian pope in, I believe, 455 years.
Long time.
And he was one of the longest reigning popes as well. And during his tenure, he really made a difference not only in unifying Catholics with Jewish people and other religions, but he also helped guide Poland out of communism and the other European countries in making that transition out of communism too. So he really was very involved in world events and very much a humanitarian.
Indeed. I like Ike. So President Dwight D. Eisenhower, and at this point, when this portrait was taken, was he president or he was still...
This was 1946,
okay,
so this was very early.
He was still a general
and
then.
He was still a general then. He certainly was general of the Army during World War II and chief of staff before he became president. And he, is somebody who was president twice. He was the leader of our country twice, and really getting us through that war. He played a pivotal role.
Well, he defeated the Germans. He was the commander of the Allied forces in Europe. And these 5 general stars, people might recognize them from seeing signs on the interstate system, which of course he was instrumental in making sure that we had for America, and it really changed the way of life in America. So kudos to him.
Now we have Eleanor Roosevelt, who of course is a first lady. She was the wife of President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and she was somebody who during his presidency and even prior to his presidency really was his great helpmate. I mean, she was instrumental in everything that he did. And even beyond what he accomplished and what she helped him accomplish, she was a very strong woman and did quite a bit on her own. She advocated for women's rights and workers' rights. She wrote a column. She lectured extensively, and she worked with the UN Commission on Human Rights as well. So she was involved in many, many things, really primarily the rights of people.
There's a famous picture of her in an airplane with an African-American pilot, and I saw it over at Moton Field, right?
Yes.
And by her saying, "I am willing to be flown by a pilot of color," it changed the mentality of a lot of people back then in the 1930s or 1940s, when it was thought that African Americans didn't have the IQ to be pilots, and so that picture spoke louder than words, and a lot of Tuskegee Airmen told me they revere that picture and revere her, and there's some historians who say as great as FDR was, she is no slouch, and in some ways might have even cast a larger shadow upon America than her husband, the longest serving president.
Right, and of course that Alabama connection there.
No, tell me, what's the Alabama connection?
Well, Tuskegee.
Okay, yeah, there you go. Yes, indeed.
This is Václav Havel.
The poet, is that?
Yes, and a playwright and a humanist. And he was somebody very involved in the, he was part of a dissident group during the Czech Revolution, and actually became the first president of the new Czech Republic once it had split. So he's been involved in a lot of humanitarian efforts, and he was awarded the U.S. Presidential Medal of Freedom back in 2003 and the Order of Canada as well. So he's well recognized for all of his humanitarian efforts.
He was on the right side of history, I guess, or he just had a higher conscience and was respected for his leadership.
And here, of course, we have an Alabamian, Helen Keller, and she's pictured with her assistant, Polly Thompson, and she was born in Tuscumbia, Alabama, and of course was blind and deaf from a very early age. But she went on to attend college and would give lectures and speak out for workers' rights and, of course, rights for the disabled. And she wrote a number of books, again, won the Presidential Medal of Freedom. What Karsh really wanted to do with this portrait was to focus not only on her face, but also on her hands, because he thought there was light that came from her hands. And of course, that's the way she spoke. So that was really important for him to capture this. And I think it's also a wonderful image showing the relationship between these two women.
Is that Anne Sullivan?
No, this is her companion after Anne Sullivan died, Polly Thompson. And Polly was here with her for a number of years, about 40 years. So.
Indeed, and of course she's on the Alabama quarter, and it has Braille on it. It's the only quarter of all of the United States all of the states of the United States
Right.
that has Braille. So she's a big figure in Alabama history for sure.
One of the few images in color.
There we go. No sooner do I say he
Right.
worked a lot in black and white. I see that he did do color every once in a while.
And the other unusual part about this image is that you do see some background.
Right.
In much of the other portraits, you only see this deep, rich, black color, and you don't have any details
Sure.
about their environment. But here, this is, very appropriate because this is Elie Wiesel, who was a writer, and that's how most people know him. He is pictured here amongst many of his books. He is also a Jewish Holocaust survivor, and much of his family was killed in the camps, and he did not write about it for quite a while, but then he did start writing about his experiences and has continued to go on and really be an advocate for human rights all over the world, and he's won, Nobel Peace Prize, actually, is probably one of the major achievements in terms of awards, but he's been very powerful. An unfortunate note is that much of his foundation lost quite a bit of money in the Bernie Madoff scandal.
Sure.
So.
I love this picture here of Mr. Schweitzer.
Yes,
Just
Albert Schweitzer.
The detail with the hair, the wrinkles, the shadows. That's why Mr. Karsh
He
was
looks
a good
so
photographer.
contemplative and just bearing sort of the weight of the world on his shoulders there. And Schweitzer, of course, is a French medical missionary, and he's a humanitarian, and he is probably best known for establishing the hospital in Africa, and that was his life's work, working in this hospital and really getting medical care to so many people. He is also a Nobel Peace Prize winner.
Now, this says gelatin silver print. What
Yes.
does that mean?
It's a process,
Okay.
and
It made me hungry for just a second.
it has to do with the surface coating on the paper.
Okay.
And gelatin silver print is always a black and white print, and that's just, like I said, it has to do with the process and the type of paper that is used.
Well, just the distinct, minute differences in color tone. Really, I feel like I can touch Schweitzer's jacket and would feel the tweed.
That print process it allows for that, because what happens is that the gelatin silver sits on top of the paper, so you're not printing into the weave of the paper itself. It's actually almost like a coating on the paper, and that gives it that really rich color and that more silvery look to it.
Indeed. Now, Jennifer, you've thrown me a curve. I knew all of these other portrait subjects except Gray Owl or Archibald Bellany, and tell us his
Yes.
story. What does he do to warrant inclusion in this great
Well,
exhibit?
Archibald Bellany actually is an Englishman who emigrated to Canada and changed his name to Gray Owl once he began living with the Ojibwe Indians. Now, there's been quite a bit of controversy about him, and there's been some movies made about him. I believe Pierce Brosnan played him in a movie. But he was really called into question because so many people thought that he was a native Indian, and of course that was not his background. But he did, dig a little deeper, did do quite a bit of good, mostly for the conservation of land and parks. One of his dearest and closest to his heart causes was the plight of the beaver, because up in Canada for a while, the trappings of beaver, they were becoming, it was like gold here, the beaver pelt.
It's a currency, of
It
course.
was a currency, exactly. And once he really became, he started off as a trapper, and once he really became aware of what was going on, he changed his ways and wrote several books that made a difference in how people viewed the beaver and other natural resources, and was influential in certainly conservation efforts for the land.
Excellent. And this, I think, might be the most famous portrait of Mr. Karsh, definitely the
It is. This portrait of Winston Churchill is probably what Karsh became most identified with. And certainly, although he had been photographing a lot of famous people prior to this, it's the one that really made him. It was put onto the cover of Life, and I think it's also the image that's most closely identified with Churchill as well. What's really interesting about this portrait is that Karsh was given about 2 minutes to take it, and Churchill wasn't even aware that arrangements were made for him to have his portrait taken. So he came in after a speech in Canada and came into this area that Karsh had set up, and he just had lit a cigar and was smoking it, and Karsh asked him to remove the cigar, and Churchill didn't. So Karsh walked up, and as he says in some of his reminiscences, that he did it with the utmost respect, but removed the cigar from Churchill's mouth, and that's when he clicked the shutter, catching this, expression of a little bit of, what are you doing?
And he was the Prime Minister of England.
That's right.
And especially
That's right.
during World War II. And I don't think I've ever saw a picture of Prime Minister Churchill smiling, and I think it's because this image is so burned into a lot of people's minds.
Well, Karsh did take one more image that had a slight smile, and that's the one the family preferred, but this is the one that the world has come to know, and it really stood for the fortitude and determination that Churchill was, bringing to the world with his stance and what he was doing, to kind of rally Britain in World War II. So.
Because at that time it was being bombarded by Nazi rockets.
Right.
So.
This was, I think, taken maybe a month after Pearl Harbor.
Okay.
So.
Good deal. Well, Jennifer, congratulations on putting together such a great exhibit, and I want everyone in the audience to come out and say that I've watched this on Montgomery Focus, and as a result we will let them into the museum for free. Now, of course everyone gets to come in for free, but I just want people to say that they watch Montgomery Focus.
Well, I hope they do, and we're happy to have you here to get a closer look at these exhibitions that are here.
Well, congratulations again on being the curator for such a great exhibit, and thank you for joining us, and thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time on Montgomery Focus.